The story of Elisha's miracle is one of the most fascinating and unexpected in the Bible. Imagine a moment when a mere touch of a dead prophet's bones brings a man back to life. This kind of event challenges our understanding of reality and makes us question the extent of divine power. After all, nothing is more extraordinary than something that defies the natural laws we know, stirring in us the feeling that the impossible can indeed happen. This miracle happens without warning, ceremony, or any direct human intervention, which makes it even more impressive. When we think about life's challenges, we sometimes expect grand solutions, when in fact the unexpected can happen at a simple moment, in a totally surprising way. The message here is clear. God's power is not limited to what we can see or understand, and this invites us to open our eyes to the extraordinary around us, in both small and large situations. Moreover, this miracle also serves as a reminder that we do not need to fully understand something for it to have an impact. Often, the greatest transformations in our lives happen in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. This is the point where we start connecting with the essence of this story, preparing the ground to understand what was happening in the context in which this miracle unfolded. But before diving into that part, it is worth reflecting on how the unexplainable can be present in our lives, even if we do not notice it immediately. This event takes place during a time of great turmoil for Israel. The country was under constant attack from enemies, and the Moabite invasion was one of the greatest threats of the time. Amidst this invasion, a group of people is at a funeral, but their ceremony is interrupted by the approaching invaders. In desperation, they threw the dead body into Elisha's tomb, not imagining that this gesture would trigger one of the most extraordinary moments in the Bible. The dead man would come back to life just by touching the bones of the prophet. The context of this miracle cannot be ignored. It occurs during a time of chaos when the people of Israel were vulnerable and weakened. This fact makes the resurrection even more symbolic, because just like the man who was brought back to life, the people themselves needed new life, a renewal. Often in moments of personal or collective crisis, we are reminded that rebirth can occur in unexpected ways. The story teaches us that even amid chaos, something incredible can happen. Furthermore, this event makes us think about how, often in the most difficult situations, we find strength we did not know we had. Just as life was restored to that man's body, our own lives can be revitalized in moments of greatest adversity. This miracle, which seems so distant from our reality, actually carries a very close message, that when we least expect it, we can be reborn. Now that we understand the context, it's time to learn more about Elisha, the prophet whose life was marked by so many miracles. Elisha was a prophet who not only followed in Elijah's footsteps, but was also endowed with extraordinary spiritual power. He received a double portion of his mentor's spirit, which gave him an even greater responsibility in his divine mission. This endowment was not just a recognition of his worth, but also a symbol that God had chosen him to continue a work of great importance. Thus, Elisha became one of Israel's most powerful and influential prophets, whose actions transformed lives. The significance of his life and mission goes beyond the miracles he performed. Elisha was a spiritual leader during a time of great moral and spiritual decline in the kingdom of Israel. His dedication to God was so great that even after his death, his legacy continued to live, literally, with the resurrection of a man through his. Elisha's life teaches us that true power lies in unwavering faith. He lived according to God's precepts, and his example is a call for us to do the same. Today we can draw inspiration from his life to seek a greater purpose, becoming agents of change for those around us. The resurrection through his bones shows us that the legacy of a person of faith continues to have an impact, even when it seems that everything has already been done. Now let's explore the unusual occurrence that brings valuable lessons about the power of faith. The resurrection at Elisha's tomb is one of the most mysterious and surprising events recorded in the Bible. When the body of a dead man was hastily thrown into the prophet's tomb, no one expected anything extraordinary to happen. However, upon touching Elisha's bones, the man instantly revived. This miracle, besides being unusual, demonstrates God's power that transcends death and the limits of the physical body. This kind of event not only shocked those present, but also makes us reflect on how divine power can operate in unexpected ways. This resurrection serves as a powerful metaphor for moments in our lives when something that seems lost or dead can be restored. Just as the man was revived by touching Elisha's bones, we too can experience personal resurrections, whether in the context of a forgotten dream, a relationship that seemed lost, or an opportunity we thought was unattainable. The miracle shows us that God can act in surprising ways, and that even when everything seems over, new life can emerge from where we least expect it. Additionally, this story reminds us that the legacy of a life of faith can continue to bear fruit even after death. Elisha, even after passing away, remained a channel of God's power, teaching us that our actions and our faith can have a lasting impact. Our decisions and attitudes today can influence future generations, long after we are gone. Now that we understand the meaning of this King Jehoash was one of those who most benefited from his relationship with the prophet Elisha. Although he was not a deeply devout king, Jehoash recognized Elisha's spiritual authority and often sought him out for guidance. On Elisha's deathbed, Jehoash visited him, seeking advice on how to defeat his enemies, particularly the Syrians. Elisha, even weakened, gave the king symbolic instructions, showing that Jehoash's success depended directly on his faith and God's approval. One of the most important lessons for Jehoash occurred when Elisha asked the king to shoot arrows toward the ground as a sign of his victory over his enemies. However, Jehoash, with limited faith, shot only 3 times, which disappointed Elisha. The prophet declared that because of this lack of commitment, the king would only have partial victories. This story shows us that our psychological limitations and lack of complete faith can compromise the outcome of our actions, even when we are in a position of advantage. The episode teaches us that a lack of boldness and faith can limit what God has in store for us. Just as Jehoash did not fully seize the opportunity given to him, we too can fail by not fully trusting in our potential. Elisha's lesson for the king is clear. When we act with incomplete faith, our results tend to be equally incomplete. Let's now reflect on the timeless lessons this miracle and this story offer us today. The lessons from this miracle are not confined to the biblical context, but continue to resonate today. One of the clearest messages is that God's power knows no limits. Not even death can interrupt his actions. This teaches us that, no matter how desperate a situation may seem, there is always room for divine intervention, something beyond what human eyes can see. In a world where we are often challenged by difficulties, this lesson offers hope that the impossible can become a reality. Another important lesson is related to faith and commitment. The example of King Jehoash shows us that the level of our faith can determine how far we will go in our challenges. Just as he limited his victories by shooting only 3 arrows, we too can limit our achievements by acting with little confidence. This teaching encourages us to practice full faith without fear of going beyond what is expected, trusting that when we give everything, the results can be greater than we imagine. Finally, this miracle reminds us of the power of legacy. Elisha's influence remained active even after his death. Similarly, our actions and decisions today can have a lasting impact on the future of others. Whether in the small interactions of everyday life or in major life decisions, we are always building something that can influence those who come after us. Now that we have explored these lessons, let's delve into some significant numbers this event reveals. The miracle of the resurrection involving Elisha is full of deep meanings, which can be extracted by looking at the details of this story. One of the most powerful insights is that the miracle occurred without any ritual or preparation, simply by touching the bones of a dead prophet. This makes us reflect on how much divine grace can operate independently of our efforts or expectations. God's power is not bound by formulas or methods, but acts in a sovereign and surprising manner. Moreover, faith is one of the pillars of this story. Elisha lived a life of total devotion to God, and even after his death, this legacy of faith continued to bear fruit. This is an invitation for us to look at our own lives and reflect. Are we leaving a legacy of faith and trust in God that can impact others even after we are gone? Like Elisha, we too have the power to positively influence those around us if we live a life based on solid principles and spiritual conviction. Another point worth highlighting is how this story can encourage us in times of uncertainty. The miracle occurred during a period of crisis and vulnerability for Israel. Yet God still manifested his power in an extraordinary way. This teaches us that, regardless of difficult circumstances, hope should never be lost. The unexpected can happen and completely change the course of history, both in the past and in the present. Now that we've seen these initiando eso insights, let's analyze some numbers that make this story even more significant. Chapter 13 of 2 Kings is where we find the record of this remarkable miracle. This biblical text provides us with an overview not only of the miracle itself, but also of the political and spiritual circumstances in which it occurred. Israel was in a period of decline, with successive failures before their enemies. The people were spiritually distant from God, and the leaders often made decisions that further alienated them from the divine path. Even in this scenario, God's power was manifested in a notable way through Elisha, showing that grace can flourish even in the worst moments. This chapter also highlights the relationship between King Jehoash and Elisha, who was already near death. By seeking the prophet for guidance, Jehoash demonstrated an attempt to maintain some connection with the divine, even though his faith was limited. Elisha's advice to shoot the arrows symbolized the victory that God intended to give the king, but Jehoash's hesitant attitude prevented him from receiving the fullness of this blessing. The text reminds us that partial commitment to faith can result in incomplete blessings. Moreover, 2 Kings 13 gives us a glimpse of how God's power transcends human life. Even after Elisha's death, the miracle of resurrection shows that God was still active in Israel, even amid spiritual crisis. This message teaches us that even when the circumstances around us seem bleak, God's power remains intact. Now let's look at some details about Jehoash's 3 limited acts that illustrate this lesson clearly. The 3 strikes that King Jehoash made with his arrows symbolize his lack of spiritual conviction. When Elisha commanded him to strike the ground, the prophet expected a demonstration of robust and unwavering faith. However, Jehoash, with his limited faith, struck the ground only 3 times, indicating that his future victories against his enemies would be partial and incomplete. This lack of enthusiasm reflects how we often act hesitantly in our own walk of faith. This passage teaches us that the size of our faith often determines the extent of our achievements. If Jehoash had acted with greater determination and confidence, his victories would have been complete, and he would have defeated his enemies once and for all. Similarly, we are invited to reflect on how our attitudes of faith, or the lack of it, can influence the outcomes in our lives. If we only give half of ourselves, the results will likely also be partial. Additionally, this story makes us think about how we are called to act boldly when facing challenges. Just as Jehoash had the opportunity to achieve great victories, we too have opportunities in our lives that, if seized with faith and courage, can lead us to surprising results. Now that we understand the lesson behind Jehoash's 3 strikes, let's explore another number that appears in this story. The 18 years of oppression by the Moabites was one of the most difficult periods for the people of Israel. This long time of suffering symbolizes the enemy's ongoing resistance and Israel's inability to free itself on its own. During these years, the people experienced fear, scarcity, and uncertainty, unable to see a clear solution to their problems. However, even after such a long time of oppression, God still demonstrated that his intervention could bring freedom and renewal. Elisha's miracle is a powerful reminder that no matter how long suffering persists, it is never permanent. These 18 years also invite us to reflect on the prolonged periods of difficulty we face in our own lives. Sometimes we go through phases that seem endless, where solutions or relief seem far out of reach. However, Israel's story teaches us that patience and perseverance are essential because at the right time, change can happen. Elisha's miracle serves as a symbol of hope for anyone going through a period of suffering, showing that even the most prolonged situations can be reversed. Furthermore, the fact that the people of Israel were freed after so many years of oppression teaches us never to underestimate the power of divine intervention, even if it takes time to manifest. The wait, no matter how long, can be the prelude to a great transformation. Now that we've covered the main numbers and lessons of this story, let's close with a final reflection that ties all these teachings together.